Why is every fossil Pokemon a rock type? In the modern Pokemon world, we can see a wide array of Pokemon with all sorts of types. But if you start to look back into the past, sure, a lot of these types still exist, but they're always paired with rock. Why? It's a question most people probably asked themselves once, thought, oh, yeah, I guess that is kind of weird, and then moved on with their day. Or maybe you're like me. Maybe this simple question has plagued your nightmares and consumed every moment of your waking life. Maybe your quest for answers too has led you through the annals of science and history, learning to reach through time and uncover the origins of life itself, only to lead you here. Or maybe you assumed it was just like a fun little reference to, oh look, the fossils are rocks, so the rock Pokemon, they're rocks too. Get it? Get the rock, the rock is a rock, rocks? But that's not good enough for me. If you're new around here, I like to use math and science to try and understand the world of video games. And, if we're lucky, understand a bit more about the real world too. So today, I want to look at 3 possible explanations, each one increasing in scientific legitimacy and believability, all to answer the question, why are all fossil Pokemon rock type? Richard, hit that intro. From what I've seen, the most commonly accepted answer to this question is that all fossil Pokemon aren't rock. Or at least, they didn't used to be. Many people speculate that some aspect of this fossil reviving process always spits out Pokemon with the rock type, no matter what type they used to be. Now, first of all, trying to explain the real-world science behind some Jurassic Park nonsense may seem impossible. But would you believe me if I told you that there is more merit to this hypothesis than meets the eye? It turns out that bringing a species back from extinction is far closer to fact than fiction, thanks to a little molecule called DNA. Think of DNA like physical code, living in each and every one of your cells. They're like the instructions that tell your proteins how to make, well, you. And now the quirky little thing about DNA is that if you figured out your exact genome, the exact order of your DNA, you could, in theory, make another you. And it's actually super easy. Just get some of your DNA, implant it into a modified egg cell, let it gestate and grow, and pretty soon you'll have your very own identical twin that's also a tiny little baby. Okay, admittedly, it's a little bit more complicated than that. It's called cloning. It's among one of the most complicated things humanity has ever done, and it's never been done with a human before. But it has been successfully done with a bunch of different species. And the crazy thing is, the DNA that you start with doesn't have to come from a living creature. Heck, it doesn't even have to come from a living species. As long as you've got the DNA and a way to grow it, you could go full Jurassic Park and bring a dinosaur back to life. The genetics is not the problem here. The tricky part is getting the DNA. As an organic compound, DNA doesn't last all that long. When left to decay, it's estimated that DNA loses around half of its genetic information every 500 years. After about 6 to 7 million years, there is nothing left. The last of the dinosaurs went extinct around 66 million years ago, and existed for 165 million years before that. And if the Pokédex is to be believed, which I mean, maybe it's not. It says some pretty wacky things. But many fossil Pokemon are said to be 100 million years old, while Kabuto is 300 million years old, meaning Kabuto would have been older to the very first real-world dinosaur than the last of the dinosaurs are to us. And sure, Pokemon is a magical world where turtles can grow guns out of their backs and get stored as digital data in a computer. So maybe their DNA is a lot more resilient than ours. But even so, after hundreds of millions of years, you're gonna have some gaps. And in order to create a proper clone, you need a complete genome. So if you're a fossil researcher in the Pokemon world, you got two options. Keep digging up mountains and mountains of old amber in hopes that these incomplete pieces will eventually cover the whole sequence, or you could just fill in the gaps. After all, no matter what species it comes from, all DNA is made from the same stuff, just in a different order. If you're missing a couple traits from your Tyrant genes, we'll just snip something out of something similar and plug it in its place. Now, if this sounds like an act of playing God that Ian Malcolm would have some very strong feelings about, I have some bad news. We, found a way, John. In 2024, the biotech company known as Colossal Biosciences were studying a species of wolves native to North America known as the dire wolf. Yes, that thing from Game of Thrones that went extinct around 10,000 years ago. Now, they were able to piece together enough of its genome and splice it with genes from the modern-day gray wolves to effectively de-extinct the species with 3 newborn dire wolf puppies. Now, you could argue whether these 3 pups are really de-extinct dire wolves, just big white gray wolves, or something new entirely. But the important thing is that this technology is real and it works. And perhaps the scientists of the Pokemon world are doing something similar. They're able to extract incomplete DNA strands from old species from fossils, and they fill in the gaps with modern-day rock types, giving these Pokemon the types that we know them to have today. Why rock types specifically? It could be as simple as convenience. I mean, fossils are usually found in caves after all. Maybe they just dug one up, thought, yeah, we're definitely missing a couple pieces here. Hey, strange floating rock man, would you like to spare some genes? Hey! Then again, perhaps there's a deeper reason here. After all, Pokemon have always had a strange connection with rocks and stones, allowing them to achieve new, powerful forms. Maybe rock-type Pokemon are simply more adaptable, making their genes more suited to this sort of substitution. So it's not a quirk with the fossil reviving process that makes them all rock, but the substitutions they use to fill in the missing holes that time has created. And yeah, it sounds super like mad sciencey when you spell it out like that, but maybe they were kind of right to do that, because the folks in Galar, they clearly decided to take a different approach and splice ancient DNA with different ancient DNA and wound up with some absolute abominations. Look at the horrors we have wrought upon this world. Shame! Then again, just like these genomes, there are a few holes in this theory as well. Because unlike our world, where a mass extinction event wiped out almost all these ancient creatures, and the few that survived were forced to drastically change, there are a few Pokemon from the times of the fossils that still exist relatively unchanged to this day. Not only has the Carbink species existed for far longer than the likes of Armaldo, each individual one is said to have a lifespan of over 100 million years. Relicanth is stated to have remained unchanged for also 100 million years, they love that number, giving it the nickname the living fossil. And wouldn't you know it, these two Pokemon are both also rock types, which would seem to suggest that, yes, rock-type Pokemon were simply more common back then. To understand why, we need to talk a little bit about evolution. And no, not this nonsense that Pokemon calls evolution. I'm talking real-world, Darwinian, change of species, evolution. Real evolution seems insanely complicated at a glance, but it's actually just the result of statistics. See, when you pass on your DNA in a more traditional way, and not some crazy cloning experiment, your kid will get half its DNA from you, and half its DNA from its other parent. However, life is messy, and that passing on process doesn't always go that smooth. Sometimes a gene or two will get messed up in the transaction, leading to a mutation, a new trait that did not exist in either parent. This happens all the time, and most of the time the change is inconsequential, something super small, maybe not even noticeable. But occasionally, one of these little random mutations may end up being a little bit helpful. Now, you're not going to shoot like lasers out of the punch dimension from your eyes, but say your neck might be just a little bit longer than it was supposed to be, making it easier for you to reach the leaves in higher trees. And this beneficial trait will make it slightly easier for you to survive out there in the world, giving you a slightly better chance of living long enough to pass that helpful mutation onto the next generation. And even if the benefit is tiny, due to the law of large numbers, given enough time with hundreds and thousands and millions of generations, this helpful mutation will be passed down more and more often, slowly spreading throughout the population until they bear little resemblance to their ancestors. And there is evidence that this sort of evolution exists in the Pokemon world too. Durant is said to have developed a hard steel shell to protect it from hunters, while Heatmor evolved the ability to breathe fire to melt through that shell. Now this is important because it means that when looking at a large enough time frame, you should expect to find less genetic variation the further back in time you go, before these mutations had time to develop and spread. Which means there is a second possible explanation to this question. All fossil Pokemon are rock type because most Pokemon of that era were rock type. This could be for one of two reasons. Maybe the environment of the Pokemon world back then was, for some reason, more conducive to rock types. After all, evolution will naturally tend to favor traits that help a species survive in its specific environment. For example, in the real world, our atmosphere used to contain a lot more oxygen 100 million years ago, allowing dinosaurs to reach such massive sizes. Now, the other possibility is that rock was one of, if not the first type, that all the others branched off from. In the real world, we know that life began in the water. Perhaps Pokemon life similarly developed in stone, explaining why even non-rock types still possess a connection to rocks and stones. And yes, I know that the Pokedex says that Mew was the common ancestor of all Pokemon, which would make Psychic the first type, but as I talked about in this video, that doesn't actually make any sense. I really like this theory. It makes me want to try and chart the development of Pokemon types through the ages. But unfortunately, I couldn't find that linchpin piece of evidence that ties the whole thing together. Probably because the makers of these games were absolutely not thinking about this stuff, and it's just one big coincidence. Then again, perhaps a coincidence is just the key we've been looking for to solve this mystery. All this time, we've been assuming that if all fossil Pokemon are rock, it must mean that all Pokemon that existed from that time period were also rock. After all, it'd be a pretty big coincidence if the ancient Pokemon world was just as diverse as our own, and we just so happen to only find the rock types, right? Then again, maybe not. Maybe it's not a coincidence that only the rock types Pokemon's bones survived to the modern day. Maybe they survived because they were rock types. It turns out, not all bones turn to hard rock for paleontologists to dig up millions and millions of years later. In fact, most don't. Bones are made primarily from collagen and calcium phosphate, which aren't terribly durable, all things considered. When left out to the wind and elements, they will erode away in a few 100 years at best, leaving no fossil evidence behind. On a geological time frame, that's the blink of an eye. However, if in that very short window, the skeleton is buried by sediment, perhaps by a shallow body of water or a mudslide, it can stall that decaying process. When buried, there's a chance that groundwater can seep into the gaps in these decaying bones, bringing sediment with them. Under the immense weight of the earth that piles up on top of them over a few million years, that sediment can harden into rock, preserving the bones as much more durable fossils. As you may have guessed by the conspicuous lack of mudslides happening left and right all over the world, this doesn't happen all that often. In fact, it's estimated that we've only discovered around 30% of the dinosaur species that existed on Earth, though we really have no way of knowing for sure. There are almost certainly loads of species that lived in mountains and other environments ill-suited to fossil formation that we will never know about. We've already talked about how the DNA of these fossil Pokemon would need to be more resilient to erosion to be able to be used in this de-extinction process. Perhaps the reason all fossil Pokemon are rock types is because their bones are more, well, rock-like, making them more resistant to erosion and therefore more likely to survive to the modern day to be dug up by a 10-year-old, brought back to life, and made to fight other school kids' pets. Kind of feels like there's a better use for this technology here, but the ancient Pokemon world could theoretically have been just as diverse as the modern day one, with Pokemon of all types and varieties. The ones with rock baked into their genes and bones may not have been any more or less likely to survive back then, but their skeletons would be. So while all the other ancient species faded away to time, the rock type remained, giving the false impression of an ancient world of stone. So there you have it. 3 possible explanations for why all fossil Pokemon are rock type. Which one do you like best? And hey, you know what? If you like this video, guess what? I post new videos about math, science, and video games every single Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern. A lot of people don't know that. They seem like surprised whenever I upload. They're like, oh my god, he put a video out! It's every single week. So, you know, hit that subscribe button if you want to see new videos like this as soon as they come out. We're getting super close to 60,000, which would be just insanely super cool to hit. And hey, if you don't want to wait, I got a massive backlog of videos to binge that you'd probably like. If you want to learn more about the de-extinction of the direwolves and Pokemon genetics, I got a video all about Mewtwo that'll pop up in the end card in a second here, or another all about the physics of gravity in video game worlds. That's pretty fun too. Anyway, hope to see y'all next week, or, you know, maybe like in a few seconds if you want to keep procrastinating whatever task you were supposed to be doing. I know, I see you, I get it. I've been playing Slay the Spire 2 like the whole time while working on this video. I get it. And a massive thank you to all my supporters on Patreon, including Aspa102, Alakazam, Captain Kirby, Sherry and Mark, Sidian, Big Dog Ty for to win, The Boss Killer 94, Stylish, Ty Studio, Alex, and Richard Devotee III.